Yeah, okay. Thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. Maybe at the end, if there's time, I'll tell the story of how Velocity got started. But for now, let me get going on this talk. And I think that, how do I start this? Start. There we go. I think we'll have time. I'll try to go through it kind of quickly. So I did kind of use a little poetic license with the title of the talk. I wanted to make it sound more attractive and appealing and interesting. But I want to tie into this word joy. We actually use it quite a bit. I work at this company called SpeedCurve, and we talk about trying to help our customers create fast, joyous experiences. And I think that that captures the essence of what I want to talk about today. I don't know, it doesn't happen often, at least not for me, but every once in a while, I find a website that's actually enjoyable to use. It's fast. I know how to get things done. It lets me complete things quickly, and I really, really enjoy that. And so I think that's what we all really want to set out to do, is create this experience for our users that is a fast, joyous experience. But I think we have to take a step back and we have to think about what's the real goal for our business. Wait, I'm sorry, this is the US version. I'm speaking in Australia next month. That's not it. Okay, here's the right one. Okay. And I actually really like this shot because if I just take the N out, I have my own football club, or I would call it a soccer club. Okay, so just so everyone knows, that was the funniest joke of the whole talk. So everything goes downhill from here. But seriously, like, what is your business's goal? What are you really after? And I think that we had some talks this morning about how to pull teams together, and Eric talked about a unifying theme. And I think focusing on users is a unifying theme that we can get everyone in the company to rally around. And that seems kind of obvious, like, the customer comes first and stuff like that. But I think a lot of times we end up getting in this situation where, with the expression I use is the tail is wagging the dog. We've kind of lost sight of what it is that we're really working on, what our goal really is. Today, Eric talked about the Boston Marathon emergency rescue workers saying, my job is saving lives. And I think our day-to-day work is not going to be that dramatic, fortunately. But I do think that a lot of times we can get bogged down into what we're doing in the day-to-day grind of what we're doing and kind of our short-term goals. And we can lose sight of the big picture, which is we have people using our products, we have users coming to our websites, and we want to make those users happy, successful, help them do what they're trying to get done when they come there. And I think a lot of times we lose sight of that. And this first occurred to me, I was working, helping this company a couple of years ago, and I do a lot of kind of social media stuff. I blog a lot and tweet a lot. And so they asked me to work with the marketing team. And I kind of rolled my eyes because I'm an engineer. And when engineers work with marketing, you roll your eyes. Yes, I'm going to perpetuate that stereotype. And so I went over and they said, yeah, we'd like you to help us, write some blogs and help us with, our Twitter account. And I said, okay, so what are your goals? Why are you doing those things? Well, we want to have at least 2 blog posts a week and at least 6 tweets a day. And I said, well, I know you've been working hard on that. And to be honest, I've been following our Twitter account and I had to stop following it because the tweets are terrible. They're really kind of annoying. They're really focused on sales. It seems like you've set a goal which is about marketing, but the purpose of this company is not to have a good social media presence or to do a certain number of blog posts or tweets per day or per week. It's to make our users successful. And so one way you might view that from a marketing perspective is how many people are reading the blog posts? Or even more, how many people are commenting on the blog post? To me, that's a good blog post, is if people have engaged with it. When it comes to tweets, how many people are retweeting? How many people are following? How many people are retweeting? When I see a company and they're doing 8 or 10 tweets a day and and they're getting 1 retweet or 1 like, that is not good social media marketing. And so I kind of was, to be honest, a little disdainful about how they had lost sight of what the real goal was. And then from that meeting, I went to a meeting with the engineers, who are awesome and cool. And we started talking about this, really, like, we're going to take this, we re-architected this layer of code, and we're going to make it a data abstraction so that if we ever wanted to deploy it for some other business purpose, which of course was never going to happen. So we had no user requirements, no internal business requirements, it was going to be really much more awesome code, but no user would ever benefit from that. And after that meeting, I realized that I had done the same thing. I had lost focus on, and these engineers that were working on this, they were not working on other features that users had actually asked for. And I realized that I had lost focus. I had the tail wagging the dog. I was doing engineering for engineering's sake. And I had lost sight of what users really wanted and what they needed, and creating that experience that would make them successful. And I really think that if, again, it seems kind of obvious, if you make your user successful, the company is going to be successful as well. I believe that. So what I started really focusing on was really looking at the metrics. Now, of course, everything I do is from the lens of performance. And so we've been collecting these I've been doing performance metrics for 15 years. And I felt like we were doing the same thing. I felt like I was tracking the number of blog posts per week and the number of tweets per day with a lot of the performance metrics that we had. And that we were not tracking metrics that were highly correlated to creating successful users, to creating that great, joyous user experience. And so that's when I started thinking about different kinds of metrics, and eventually it led me to joining SpeedCurve. So I want to walk through some of these metrics that I think are going to bring us closer to creating these joyous user experiences. Now, it seems kind of, cliched to go from that statement to showing some charts that have to do with revenue. But that is a way that many users express their satisfaction or have a successful completion of their engagement with your site, is with a conversion or a purchase or a registration. And so I think that in the world, hopefully everyone knows this, in the world of performance metrics, there's primarily only synthetic and RUM. And so this chart is from Mpulse, the world's most popular RUM product. And they've done for years a great job of mashing up performance metrics with business metrics like cart size or conversions or registrations. And certainly, I think, again, I haven't gone through my talk where I show all the case studies that show a high correlation between good performance and fast websites and business metrics like revenue and conversions. But that's what they've found with their customers. And so I think this is really important, and it's good if you can work with the people in your organization on what are the key business metrics for your website, and then mash those up with your performance metrics and try to see if there are correlations between making the website faster and optimizing that business metric. Now, when we say business metric, for most of us, that's going to be something around money. But it's not always that case. For example, for the Mozilla team, it's how many people download Firefox. And they've actually done case studies where they've optimized performance to make the experience faster that have increased the number of Firefox downloads. For Google, it's about searches. Now, it turns out searches are actually directly correlated to revenue, but it's not actually dollars. It's how many searches people do. But whatever it is, those are business metrics, and mashing that up with performance is a great way to see how well you're getting users to engage with your site. From Velocity New York, I wanted to show these next two slides from a talk that Pat Meenan, he's the creator of Web Page Test, works at Google, and Tammy Everts, she's an evangelist at SOSTA and is going to be the new Velocity/Fluent co-chair with Kyle Simpson. And they did this talk where they took a lot of SOSTA is the parent company that owns Impulse. They took a lot of that Impulse RUM data and they applied several machine learning algorithms to it to find which metrics were highly correlated to a good user experience or not correlated, inversely correlated to bounce rate, which would be a bad user experience. And they had a couple interesting findings. And I thought this one was good because they found that DOM content loaded, which is part of the navigation timing spec, so we can all collect this with RUM data, was one of the most highly correlated metrics to a good experience. And yet, I don't know of any RUM product out there that actually provides charts for DOM content loaded. And we announced our RUM product last week, and it's on our to-do list, but we do not have DOM content loaded in our RUM product either. And so whether you're using, I would bet that all of the RUM services are collecting it, and all you need to do is request that they provide charts of that. So if you're not tracking DOM content loaded now, you should be. Another finding they had was something that I did know from work I did, a massive study I did about 8 years ago, which was the number of DOM elements mattered a lot in avoiding a large bounce rate and creating a fast user experience. And this, like I said, I did this study a long time ago. I knew that this was a highly correlated variable, and so we did get this one into speed curve. In speed curve, we have not only the number of DOM elements, but we have average DOM depth. Any guesses why average DOM depth? Yes?
CPU heavy.
It's CPU heavy. The bigger thing is average DOM depth is going to have a major impact on how CSS is applied to the page. Because we have a lot of these descendant rules and child rules, and those have to crawl the DOM, and a lot of times they have to crawl the entire DOM from an element to the root. And so if you have a high average DOM depth, that's going to really impact, it's going to increase your CSS time. And so 9 actually is pretty high. 6 is about average. So I think these are Amazon stats that we have. And this is speed curve's synthetic data. I'm going to show a couple slides from different services out there. Another thing that we have that I'm really surprised is not more prevalent in RUM products, if we talk about creating this good user experience, is actually tracking how our users experience our sites. And so one thing that we do is we track what's called interaction metrics. And again, this is all just RUM JavaScript. It's not that much code, so if you want to track it yourself, you can do that too very easily. So we track the first user interaction with the page. That's going to be a key press, a scroll, or a click. And we track how the speed at which the user interacts with the page. And a lot of times what you'll find is if you have a performance regression, you'll see these interaction metrics drop off. So again, this is going to tell us how well customers are interacting with our site. And if that drops off, if the interaction time increases, there's probably something that's gone wrong either with the content on the site or the performance on the site. So interaction metrics, again, something really important that people should be tracking. Now the next part I'm going to talk about has to do with rendering. And this is something that started about 3 or 4 years ago, primarily because of Pat Meenan and Web Page Test showing film strips that let us see what users were seeing as the page loaded. Something that I like to say is, imagine a page not as a static Photoshop image, but as a little mini movie. It's content that's coming in over time, or from your perspective, over time. And so what's really nice is before Pat, we mostly focused on these numbers that had to do with networking and how the browser was constructed, things like page size and number of requests, page load time. And those really are not that highly correlated to user experience, or it's not at least what users care about. I've had people, I'll be talking to people and they'll say, oh, what do you do? And I say, oh, I work on web performance, making websites faster. And almost everyone resonates with that. Oh my God, I was just trying to, book a flight or get on my bank and it was so slow, it was painful. And they never follow that with, and they had a bunch of blocking scripts on the page. Drove me crazy. Do you know how many HTTP requests they were downloading? I never hear that. People don't see that. What they care about is when can they interact with the page? When is the thing that they're waiting to see, when does that appear on the page? So what we started doing about 5 years ago is paying more attention to rendering, but it's only been in the last 2 years that we've made a lot of progress on that. So like I said, it used to be that we tracked onload. I guess I shouldn't say used to be. In most performance services, performance metrics services that you look at, window.onload, page load time, is still the number one default metric that you'll be shown. But I wanted to show a couple of these web page test film strips. Hopefully everyone's familiar with these. And they're on different times depending on how fast or slow the website is. I just wanted to get to the point where the page load time for each one of these happens. So the first one is CNN. Page load time is about 25 seconds. Here's Netflix. Page load time is 7.5. Whatever thumbnail was the page load time I've outlined in red. And so you can see here that page load time is not a very accurate metric for these teams who are building these websites. If their manager is measuring their success by page load time, they're getting shortchanged, because this page to a user is actually ready and engageable much earlier than page load time. If you look, pretty much from about here, for all the websites, the page has rendered to a large degree. There might be some things, especially ads, that come in later. And so page load time is way too late to give a good impression of what the user experience is for these sites. But it doesn't mean that it's always too late. Let's look here. Here, I've shown the page load time again in red, but I've shown enough thumbnails so that we can see when the bulk of the content, enough of the content that a user would consider it ready. And what we see is page load time is way too optimistic for all of these websites. Almost nothing on the page, completely black. Bing doesn't have a background, right? Look how this page changes. This is Zillow, I think. Now, it doesn't mean that these sites are bad. In fact, these sites are probably more advanced. They're probably doing a lot of asynchronous and lazy loading stuff. So the window onload is firing, but they're doing all of this dynamic behavior. I'm not trying to get a point across here that these websites are doing something good or something bad. I'm trying to get across the point that window.onload is no longer highly correlated to user experience, because we're doing all of this async, lazy loading, preloading, post-loading behavior in our websites. We need better metrics that are more correlated to the user experience. And in terms of rendering, we have some metrics that we can fall back on there. So the most popular ones are start render, pretty self-explanatory. When did rendering start? It doesn't mean that there's anything valuable on the page, but it means that at least at the back end has sent enough content down that the browser can start painting, and any of the early blocking resources are out of the way. And then visually complete. That's kind of the far end of the spectrum, especially if you have a slow ad or something like that. And it's really hard to have something in the middle, and that's where Pat Meenan again has come in with the metric he created called speed index, which is kind of like how long it took to draw the median pixel in the page, right? So if we have 10,000 pixels, approximately when did the 5,000th pixel get painted, right? And so we can see, there are various tools. This is our synthetic data again that can show you these rendering metrics. But these metrics, they're pretty good. They're much better than window.onload. But, and the other thing that's good about these is the website team, what the developers working on a website don't have to do anything. And you can still get these metrics for those websites, right? The problem is all of these metrics treat every pixel in the page the same. Every pixel is given the same value. And I think if you think about it, you probably already have thought about it. If you've sat down with your marketing people, salespeople, designers, and you've constructed a website, redesigned a website, you know that there are some design elements that have more value than others. The call to action button, the product photo, right? These are more valuable than other pixels in the page. And yet, for these metrics, any pixel is going to be considered in generating the value of the metric. So the way that we have to get around this problem of putting a higher value and getting metrics on the pixels that matter is with custom metrics. So what's custom metrics? So it starts by doing something that's pretty easy to do if you're starting on a new product. It's really hard to do if you're starting on a product that's been out for 3 years and there are already a lot of stakeholders across the organization. But you have to figure out what those critical design elements are on the page. Once you figure, and you can have more than one, that's okay. And once you've figured out what those are, you want to measure when those are getting rendered. And you can do that with the user timing spec. If you haven't used the user timing spec before, it's pretty straightforward. There's this new, thanks to the W3C Web Performance Working Group, Yoav talked about that yesterday morning in his keynote. There's a new global object called performance. Underneath that, there's just two simple functions, mark and measure. Mark is kind of like a start or a milestone in the page. You can have as many marks as you want. Measure is the delta between now and some other milestone. If you don't specify another milestone, it just uses the beginning of the page loading sequence, navigation start. And so you can see here like one type, here's an example of something we might want to measure. Maybe we have some JavaScript in our page and we want to measure how long it takes the browser to evaluate and execute that JavaScript. We could put a mark at the beginning. This is when main.js started being evaluated, and we could put a measure at the end, take a delta from main.js start, and get the total execution time. We could do this with an inline script block. The really amazing thing to do, which everyone here should be doing, is do this in all of your externally loaded scripts. And now you'll have, you'll know how long it's taking your scripts to execute. So this is something that Facebook has done for a while. Ben Maurer from Facebook talked about this at Velocity Santa Clara. And they have a build system for the delivery of all their scripts. So they put these marks and measures at the top and bottom of every script that gets loaded on their page. And now they have this information of how long it takes for scripts to execute. So that's just one example of a custom metric. You could use it for images or other content on the page. And the thing that's nice about this is you're using the user timing spec. So most synthetic and RUM services out there will gather your user timing metrics, your custom metrics, and let you plot those and set alerts on them and notifications. Now, Yoav yesterday also talked about new stuff coming out from the W3C Web Performance Working Group. And I wanted to mention these really quickly. One that, on first blush, to me seems very exciting are these concepts of a first paint, a first contentful paint, and the other one he mentioned is a first meaningful paint. So first paint, that's pretty much like start render. Right now, the way start render is done, it's not behind a spec. And so browsers do them differently. So we're going to get that behind a spec. That's going to be a good thing. The first contentful paint is we just didn't paint a black background. We actually painted something in the page that the user can see. And there's a way the browser can detect this. So that might be valuable too. The problem is that that thing that could have been rendered could be any pixel in the page. It could have been an ad. And so again, it doesn't really tell us anything about these important design elements that we have. The first meaningful paint is even more challenging to define, in code, an algorithm, a heuristic, for what is an amount of content on the page that gets rendered that's meaningful. But again, even if we could define that, it's going to be based on the number of pixels in the page, which is going to give every pixel in the page the same value. So you could have a lot of content get rendered in the page, and maybe it was all the ads, and the thing that the user really wants to see still didn't get painted. You don't know what actually got painted. It's only been a certain amount of meaningful pixels that got painted. So I think these will be useful, but it still doesn't do what we need to do, which is to track the content that matters to the user. So how are we going to do that? The one that is most exciting, and I think actually Yoav has taken the lead on it, and he mentioned it yesterday, is called the Hero Element API. And the idea is the syntax, none of this stuff is even implemented. I think Chrome might have done some early work on them, but none of them are that well defined. There's proposals for them. So this syntax might change, but the example document proposal for the Hero Element API has this example. So it's going to be this thing called element timing. You'll be able to do this on as many elements in the page as you want. And each time you say element timing, that tells the browser, I am going to record the time that this element was rendered. And it could be off a little bit depending on what has to be done to actually transfer that content to the screen. But it's not going to be off by much. And then you give element timing the name that you want to give to that time measurement. And so in this case, maybe it's like a search results page. And so this would be a way that you could very easily, without that user timing spec that I had before, you could very easily in markup make sure that you got timing information for the important design elements in the page. So this is the one that's really going to be most important for us if we want to try to track what's important to the user experience. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit here. Everything I've been talking about so far is going to be metrics that we can monitor to try to get an idea of how good of a user experience we're creating. And then when you discover that the user experience is degrading, you're going to want to try to figure out why. So there are some additional new metrics that are available to us that I think are really important to focus on when we're trying to create these great user experiences. So I wanted to run through 3 or 4 of those really quickly. One is the critical blocking resources. If anyone's tried to accelerate their start render time, you know what I'm talking about. Style sheets and synchronously loaded scripts block rendering in the page. And so it's not that hard to track the number of style sheets, and you can load style sheets asynchronously. There aren't that many people doing it. But it's not that hard to track how many synchronously loaded style sheets and synchronously loaded scripts there are in the page. And if you see that increase, like this is, I think this is Yahoo I got this data from. Like that's a pretty big swing from maybe 14 to 5 over a period of less than a week. My guess is it's third-party content, but if you have that little control over the blocking scripts that get loaded on your site, you're going to have very unpredictable behavior from your users. So critical blocking resources is a great metric that everyone should be tracking. And another thing that we've done that I think we're going to see other tools, performance tools do, in SpeedCurve, this is our waterfall chart. We've drawn, so orange is scripts, and green is style sheets. For the ones that are loaded in blocking mode, we put a little hash pattern on them, so that when you're looking at things like, why did start render happen all the way out here? even though my scripts most of them, early ones got done loading here, you can see that the most likely reason is the style sheet had to be applied to the page, and then each of those blocking scripts had to be downloaded and parsed and executed in sequence. And that's probably what pushed out this start render line to this point. And so I hope that we'll see all of the popular waterfall tools try to indicate these synchronously loaded critical blocking resources in a different way visually so that it's easy for developers to pick up on. And I just did this hand wavy thing where I said, probably what's happening is we're getting this JavaScript that's loaded synchronously, daisy chaining, pushing this out. And we're starting to get some good visualization of that as well. And again, Pat Meenan comes to the rescue, where now he started to draw these pink purplish bars that are the JavaScript execution time for that script. So again, the scripts are drawn in orange. And I think this is really interesting, right? This is where we see the problem with loading scripts synchronously. We had this little script right here that downloaded very quickly. Now, the one thing that Pat's not doing is he's not doing the hash pattern. But I can tell you that these three scripts are all loaded in synchronous blocking mode. And the reason is this one finished downloading first. If it was asynchronous, we would have seen the pink purple bar right here. But this script had to wait, even though it was downloaded first, it had to wait to be parsed and executed until this one was done, and this one had to wait for this one. So this one got done downloading, it got parsed and executed. Even though this one is done, it couldn't be parsed and executed until this one finished. So its parsed and execution time makes sense. And then this one that got done really, really early finally got done, and that's what pushed out the start render time. I've got another example. I think all of these are really interesting. Who is this? This is apple.com. I think this is really interesting. So this script, so before we had this visibility, I would have guessed that this script got downloaded and probably got parsed and executed about right here. But because of all of these blocking scripts and how the execution time gets pushed out, this one, even though it got finished downloading at about 600 milliseconds, didn't get parsed and executed until 1.2 seconds. That's quite a bit later. And so having this, and there's another one. Oh, this one's really cool. So this is just the opposite. All of these scripts are async. These two these two are blocking. Even though we don't have the hashing pattern, right? We can see that. This one finished downloading first. How come it didn't get parsed and executed first? It had to wait for this one. But this one actually got downloaded. If this was a blocking one, all of these would have had to wait. So this one is obviously loaded async. But once it got done downloading, these were already dominating the main thread. So this one had to wait until here. And then even though it's async, it dominated the main thread and pushed out these other scripts from being executed. So we can learn a lot about the dependency order of what's going on our pages and how it's blocking rendering with this visualization of when JavaScript is executed. But again, this is only synthetic, right? No, it doesn't have to be. So this is something I talked about earlier. We had that example from Facebook where they're putting the marks and measures inside their scripts. And at SpeedCurve, we do that as well. And so you can see we have this one script called speedcurvecombined.js. And we put the mark and measure in there. And in our waterfall chart, if you look, we actually show the custom metrics. And if it's a measurement, if it's a delta, we'll draw this little, it might be hard to see, we have this little shaded opacity region for when the execution happens. So you can see the script got downloaded, and then slightly later, the style sheets were doing stuff. It actually got parsed and executed. So because we're doing this with user timing, and just like Facebook, user timing shows up in synthetic and RUM, you can actually get JavaScript execution time across all of your real users and gather those metrics of when it happened and how long it took. So that visibility is really important. And then I think this is the last one. What we've noticed over the last 6 months at SpeedCurve, but then also other people I talked to and folks on the Chrome team, is that mobile sites are becoming more and more CPU bottlenecked. And people ask why. Well, the reason why is because we keep adding more and more. The main reason is we keep adding more and more stuff to our websites. Mobile chips are not getting slower, they're getting faster, but the sites are getting faster, bigger, faster than the chips are getting faster. And so if you're not tracking CPU especially if you're working on mobile, that's going to be something important to pay attention to. So the main thing I wanted to do was I wanted to bring us all back to what it is we're really working on. What we're not trying to do is reduce the number of bytes of JavaScript in our page. If you cut that in half, you cannot say that your company is successful, right? The thing that we're trying to do is make our users successful, is to give them that great experience. And so we really have to keep that in the forefront of our minds. And then we can figure out which metrics we think most closely approximate that, and we can track those metrics. But always keep in mind, the goal isn't to optimize these metrics. The goal is to create these fast, joyous user experiences. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
So I think we have time for a couple of questions. Looks like it's late in the day, so no one has any questions.
Okay. I'll stay up here if anyone wants to come up.
Okay, we have one. So.
Okay, Jason.
You promised a old man Velocity origin story, and I stuck around for it.
Okay. So here's how Velocity got started. John Jenkins, who worked at Amazon about 10 years ago, invited me to come up and do a tech talk. So I went up there, and it was huge. There was like 300, 400 people in the room, did this tech talk, and afterward, he took me and some other people, including John Rouser, who did a fantastic talk today, out to dinner. And so there were about 5 or 6 of us, and we talked about web performance throughout the dinner and had a few beers. And afterward, it was such a great discussion, we said, is there any kind of conference or anything we can do where we could get other people together and have these kinds of discussions? And I had just published through O'Reilly my first book, High Performance Websites. And I said, no, but O'Reilly does conferences. Let me go back and ask my editor if we could start a conference around web performance. So Andy Oram was my editor, and I asked him, and he said, well, are you going to OSCON next month? And I said, yeah, I'll be there. He goes, okay, well, Tim O'Reilly's going to be there. Why don't we, I'll mention it to him, and we'll schedule a meeting to talk about it. So I don't know how many people know Tim O'Reilly, but he's very informal. And so we had this meeting scheduled, and we show up, and Tim doesn't show up. So it turns out it was pretty early in the morning. It was like 9 a.m. or something like that. And he had to do a keynote at 10 a.m., and he hadn't started on it yet. So he skipped the meeting to write his keynote that he had to deliver in an hour. And so many things in my life, I don't know about you, turned on such a thin line like that. That could have been the end of Velocity right there. And so I go to Andy and I go, well, I'm not leaving until tomorrow afternoon. Could we try to do it tomorrow? He goes, okay, well, let me see if we can reschedule it. So we reschedule it to the next day, and Tim makes the meeting. And Gina is there, Brady Forrest, I'm there, John Jenkins from Amazon, and he brought Jesse Robbins from Amazon, who was the master of disaster, kind of on the ops side, and several other people I'm probably forgetting. And so we talk about this concept of doing a conference based around performance. And he says, okay, yeah, it sounds pretty good. And so we started so that was the end of 2007, and we scheduled it for, I think it happened, it wasn't in June, I think it was maybe it was April of 2008. And so then we kicked off these meetings, and we're working with Gina and the rest of the O'Reilly crew, and we had to pick a name. And I go, well, obviously, the Web Performance Conference. And they said, well, how about Velocity? I said, no one's going to know what that means. No, you have to call it the Web Performance Conference. And they won out, and I'm glad they did. I think Velocity is a much more appropriate name. So that's how Velocity started. Anything else? Okay, thank you. If you have any questions, come on up.